And we are live once again. Yeah, baby. Sunday morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Yes, indeed. Sunday morning. Beautiful morning. Once again, coming back at you and welcoming you to my planet, Planet Hog. And we're going to talk about some stuff today. Man, I had some good conversations yesterday, and we'll get into that here in a second. But first and foremost, hello and well met. We are here. We are live. Took Saturday off, but on the seventh day, Hog toils. Understand, it is written in the book of Hog. Excuse me. Compulsory sip of that Kentucky all. Now, I would like to welcome you all back for another episode of Planet Hog, and I am, of course, your Supreme Chancellor, Hog. Now, man, I had two good conversations, man, with two family members that I adore very much so. Look up to all the following above, but one of which is my godfather, and the other which is his brother, both uncles. Two very good conversations, man. Two relatives of mine that are in the hub. Look, they are in East Berlin, as we have aforementioned, that refers to the Northeast. So, they're behind enemy lines, but these are two men who, I respect very much. And actually, one of my uncles, I was actually on the phone with him for like 4 hours, man. We were just talking back and forth, and he brought up a lot of good points, a lot of things that challenged the way I think, because I always try to come forth with a circumspeculative point of view. I try to take everybody's point of views into account, because as a person, one of my pet peeves is when people misrepresent my, not necessarily my intentions, although it does envelope that. I'm talking about my point of view and my perspectives. So, because I try to choose my words very carefully, I believe that as a society we have a infatuation with verbicide and using words outside of their definitions and making words and definitions malleable and just kind of blending them together. All of that horse shit aside, welcome. Welcome and good day, man. Florida is smiling down, the sun is shining. And so today I want to kind of talk about, I did an episode called The Supreme Irony of 2020. I guess you can call this part two of that, or an addendum to that, which will also tie into a story that I was reading last night about one of the kidnappers, and I believe I'd have to double check here. Actually, let me do that now, because I do not like to propagate false information. So bear with me 1 second here. But I want to look into one of these guys who was arrested trying to kidnap Governor Whitmer of Michigan. And obviously, I don't endorse such a thing. But there was something very interesting here about one of the suspects. Let me tie this down a little bit more here in this search. Should have done a Boolean search, but I don't. It's early in the morning, which means it's late for me because I watch over you while you sleep, so you know that I am nocturnal by nature. But let me see if I can find this here. Funny, the FBI foiled the plot. Yes, law enforcement, the very thing you want to defund, but that makes sense. Here we go. Yep, there we are. Okay. So, anyway, um, for those of you who are not aware, there was a plot to kidnap Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan. Gretchen, if you had to, for whatever reason, someone forced you to compile a name, a list of female names that if you heard them, you would assume the person was dreadfully unattractive. I feel like Gretchen would be on everybody's list. Gretchen, what a wretched name. And there you go, wretch, Gretchen. That's why I think of it as an ugly name because the word wretch is in it. So there was a plot to kidnap her, which obviously I do not endorse. But I was speaking to one of my uncles about this, and I said, I'm very interested to hear the perspective. Excuse me, dog hair everywhere. I'm very interested to hear the perspective of the kidnappers if they interview them because they won't. And this is all part of the conversation we had. And I said, they won't interview them, but I really would like to hear an interview. And he said, why would you like to hear an interview? And I said, really, because that's the only way we have of knowing the psyche. The legal term, I believe, if those years of criminal law have not faded me from my undergrad, the mens rea, right? The mentality of the person committing the offense. I would like to know what that is. Because if we don't know that, goddamn dog hair. So if we don't know that, that's a very important piece of the puzzle that we always have to deal without. We didn't get to hear from, people like Dylan Roof. We don't get to hear from, and again, I'm not putting them in the same category as in terms of their motivations, but we don't get to hear from like the Proud Boys. They don't interview the Proud Boys. And again, I'm not comparing the Proud Boys to Dylan Roof. I'm just saying in both cases, the media have opted not to interview these people. So we don't ever get to hear their side of the story. And I think that serves a very specific purpose. If I were wanting to control or dominate the opinion, what better way than to prevent you from hearing the perspective of the person that I am then trying to characterize and create a narrative about? For example, if you, myself, and a third person were in the room, and I tried to tell you a story that this third person is a monster, a mean person, a cannibal, whatever, all of the above, what better way for me to make you believe that than to, number one, not allow you to interact with them directly, and number two, for me to never ask them their story? If they remain a silent person in the corner of the room that I tell you stories about, you're more likely to believe the stories I tell about them. So, I think that serves a specific purpose. There's a reason why they won't interview these people. Specifically, let's use the Proud Boys, for example. Well, we saw on one presidential debate, one terribly moderated presidential debate, that they threw them in the same category as white supremacists. Now, for those of us who know how to read and have an empirical bone in our body, a skeptical bone in our body, who have done a little bit of research, we can tell you right off the bat they're not white supremacists. Why? Because their leader's an Afro-Cuban. And again, as I have said in the past, I believe, I'm not completely sure, but I believe that white supremacist organizations such as the KKK, such as the American Nazi movement, these organizations, such as the League of the South, Posse Comitatus, whatever you want to call them, whichever one you want to point out, I believe these organizations frown upon Negro leadership. Now, don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure. So, for those of us with a brain that has any kind of scientific aptitude, we've been able to kind of weed through the narrative. But it still remains the fact that they have not interviewed the Proud Boys, and I don't expect the mainstream media to do that at any point in time. Why? Because, again, it gives them a monopoly on the storyline. Because if you interview them and they say, well, obviously we're not white supremacists. For example, I bet a lot of people are still not aware that there was a rally in which Black Lives Matter and the Proud Boys both attended. It was peaceful and they were both denouncing white supremacy. Again, not a white supremacist connoisseur, but I kind of believe that denouncing white supremacy is frowned upon by white supremacists. Not a genius, not the smartest guy in the room, just makes sense to me. But again, the media will not interview these people because they want to tell you what to believe. Our media is broken, okay? There was a time, and I'm young enough to know, young enough to remember, or old enough to remember, however you want to look at it, a time when the media would tell you the story. They would say, hey, this happened. Fact, fact, fact. You come to your own conclusion. Sadly, we no longer live in that kind of an environment. We live in an environment now where all of those things happen, but the media just skips to the chase and tells you what to believe. They don't tell you the facts as they happen per se. They tell you what they want you to take away from the situation. And for people like me, that is a problem because I don't like to be told how to think. Excuse me. So, there's a purpose. Again, going back to my original point, there is a specific purpose why these groups will never be interviewed. But anyway, back to the conversation that I had with my uncle. I said, I would really like to hear this interview because I guarantee you this is not some fringe white supremacist, alt-right, right? Or far-right, because that's their favorite. Those are their favorite buzzwords, right? White supremacist or far-right. Those are the media's favorite buzzwords to get you to think racist. Come on. Let's cut through the bullshit here. On this planet, the stratosphere is free of bullshit debris. So, when they say far right, when they say alt right, they're really trying to create the thought in your mind that these people are racist, specifically white supremacists. Well, it didn't take much research to see that that's what they've been castigated as in the media. That's what they've been classified as, right? That's what they do. Well, one of the leader who I have an article here, I'm going to pull it up from the Washington Post. So there you go. If it's from the Washington Post, which is extremely liberal, owned by Bezos, the man who owns Amazon, then that's saying something, right? Well, the headline here, accused leader of plot to kidnap Michigan governor was struggling financially, living in basement storage space. Now, as I am not a fan of resting on my laurels with headlines, because I think that's how a lot of people are deceived nowadays, that still stands to make an important point. One that I was trying to communicate to my uncle, which is why I wish the interview happened. Because, like I said, I don't think he's a white supremacist. I think he's a person who was a victim of the despot fiat of Governor Whitmer. The person, I should say the despotic fiat of Governor Whitmer. A person who got to taste her own power and wielded it without any kind of, number one, regard for her denizens, the denizens of her state, and number two, without any kind of appreciation, respect for checks and balances. So this article, again, on Washington Post, I would encourage all of you to look it up for yourself. Actually, you don't have to look it up. I'll include it in the description box of this video, as I do with every source that I source in my videos. But I encourage you to read it, because this was not some crazy, white supremacist guy. This was a guy who was directly, a regular person who was directly impacted by the decisions made by Michigan's power-hungry governor. A person who didn't receive a paycheck, unlike these government officials during the lockdown that they instituted that have ruined people's lives. So, And that's important to me because to me that says that could be me, that could be you, that could be anybody. That's a regular guy. They'll try to create him and portray him as a monster to suit their purposes, but just understand that that's any regular guy being trampled by their government, a tyrannical government, or in this case, governor, governess. So that's number one, right? Just this little story here, and again, this guy, the same guy we're talking about. Also, another point that bears making is this was not some alt right pro Trump guy. This guy was anti-Trump, anti-Trump. This guy was anti-government. This guy was more aligned with Black Lives Matter than anything else. By the evidence of the posters and things he had hanging in the background of one of the pictures they showed, his social media, etc., etc. This was not a quote unquote right, alt right, Republican, conservative. No, this is exactly the guy who's out there burning down cities. So I think that point bears making as well. Because again, if you watch CNN, you just think he's an alt right Republican, good people on both sides. Trump supports racism. All these lies that they tell you in perpetuity, assuming that you are lazy enough to not research the things they're telling you. So that is a point that also bears making about this individual. But moving forward to part two, like I said, there's a part two to the supreme irony of 2020. Now, I talked about that in an earlier podcast, titled as such, The Supreme Irony of 2020. Well, you know what? There's another one. There's another irony of the age that we're living in. And like I said, I kind of talked about this with my uncles over the phone. And, I enjoy talking to people over the phone before I record an episode because sometimes it gives me clarity on what I should speak on because there's a lot of ideas running around in this head of mine. And sometimes it kind of gives me a direction depending upon how passionately I feel about it. So, without further ado, I present to you another irony of the times that we live in. So, again, with this story, with a lot of stories in the past, we find you can choose any one of the cases in which Black Lives Matter and Antifa terrorized, burned down, looted, basically destroyed American cities. Pick any one of them, right? Anyone. Pick a card. I don't care what card you pick. You can pick any one of these stories. And the takeaway from that story is the same, right? You're given a brief, incomplete, uncomprehensive piece of information. Everybody goes nuts because emotional discipline is at an all-time low. And the sane people, the adults in the room say, hey, how about we all just wait for all of this information to come out? Because if there's one thing we understand about legal proceedings, it's that number one, anything with the government takes time, including legal proceedings, especially those that are high profile. And number two, the police are not just out killing people willy-nilly. Turns out that's frowned upon. So in all of these cases, for those of us who waited, eventually more information was released that kind of pieced it all together. It's like if you took a puzzle out of a box and said, well, I have a couple of pieces here. Oh, this is clearly a pig. And then it turns out, no, it's not a pig, it's a sidewalk. You just saw a couple of light colored pieces and you thought you saw something that really wasn't there. Well, same thing with all of this, right? People jump to conclusions without all of the information. And you look just as silly as the person who was, oh, this is a pig. Like, dude, no, it's not a pig. It's clearly a sidewalk. How did you get pig out of this? Exactly. How did you get police killing people willy-nilly out of this? The answer is the same, because you didn't wait for the information. As if there was some kind of timer on, well, we have to react to this now or it's going to go stale. That's not how the legal system works, right? So again, going back to the irony of the age. Excuse me. One more sip of the that Kentucky all. Now, the irony of the age for me is that what is this age called that we live in? It is called the information age. The irony is, in the information age, people seem to be dumber than ever. People seem to be more ignorant or benighted, if you really want to flummox the common imbecile. People seem to be more emotionally prone and less intelligently inclined than ever during the information age. That's amazing to me, but it's really not, right? Because if you think about it, it actually makes perfect sense. Think about, for example, consider the worth of gold compared to copper. Now, when you think of gold and you think of copper, obviously there is a premium put on gold and its worth when juxtaposed to copper. But why is that? Because when you examine both of those metals, copper is more prevalent, copper is more malleable and ductile and thus has greater utility than gold. It can be worked easier than gold. So why do we, copper is lighter than gold. So why do we put a premium on gold when for all intents and purposes, it's worthless in terms of its immediate value to us? Again, gold has to be refined. Copper does not. Gold is brittle. Copper is not. Gold is rare. Oh, wait for that. Copper is somewhat more ubiquitous, especially when you compare it to gold. Well, it comes down to the fact that yes, gold is rare. Meaning more effort is expounded, more effort is expelled to produce gold. And that's literally what it comes down to. Sure, there are some superficial characteristics of gold that we've come to appreciate more, but the value of gold derives solely from its scarcity, from the fact that you have to put forth a lot more effort to get it. So let's take that little tidbit and apply it to the information age. You know, I'm old enough to recall a time when I went to school. If you had a book report, let's say on, South American monkeys, the teacher would say, hey, little hog, you have a book report due next week on South American monkeys. So what would I do? Well, I would go to the library. I would wade and battle my way through that god-awful Dewey Decimal System that I still don't fully understand, to be perfectly honest. And I would find a book on South American monkeys. If you were a good student, you'd find a couple of books. Then you would grab them if they were there, because if they weren't there, you had to wait for them to come back. But if they were there, I'd grab them, bring them to the librarian, some haggard old woman. She would stamp the back. I would sign the little card. She would say, now bring them back in a week. I would take them home. I would read them. Then I would put the information in my own words, which was something they taught us at a young age. Again, trying to get you away from plagiarism, but they would always say, just put it in your own words. So I'd read it, put it in my own words, write it out, take it into class, read it in front of the class, hand my paper in, and that was called reporting on something, right? A lot of effort in that. Well, nowadays, what do you have to do? Nowadays, all you have to do is pull your phone out, punch in South American monkeys, and bam! You've got more information than you actually give a shit about right at your fingertips. You're actually fighting some of this information. Like, okay, well, I don't want to use this. I don't want to use this. I don't want to use it. I'll use this. It's literally the exact opposite. Well, again, and this is not an anti-technology rant, but it's understand what technology does. Technology is great because it gives us access. It makes our life easier. Well, a byproduct of that is subsequently it also makes us lazier. And because people don't have to actually search for information in terms of the first example I gave of when I was younger, and you actually have to go to the library and put forth effort and read these books, check these books out, check these books out, read them, put it in your own words, create the report. Because you don't have to do that, there is a lack of respect for the intellectual process, in my opinion. There's a lack of respect for the work you have to put forth to get this information. And because there's a lack of effort, there's a lack of respect for the process, subsequently the people don't respect the information either. They don't respect it enough to know. They're content understanding that they could get it whenever they want it. Consider this analogy. You have two people, one of them whom is born into a wealthy family, the other of whom is born into a poor family. Both of them receive $100. Who values it more? The person from the rich family who just has $100 given to them, or the person from the poorer family who had to work, scrape, save for that $100? Obviously, the person from the poorer family would respect it more. Stands to reason. Because they actually had to earn it. It means more to them because they had to put forth an effort to achieve it. Whereas the person from the wealthier family, it was given to them. So it actually has no value outside of what it can do to amuse them. Because logically, all they would have to do is ask for it again, and in theory, it would be given again. Well, that's kind of what I mean with the intellectual process. Because in the information age, those people are obviously the wealthy child in my subsequent analogy. Because information is at their fingertips, all they really have to do is ask for it. And by ask for it, just punch it into Bing. There's all the information you could ever want. But the people who grew up before all that, who understand the process of discovering information and qualifying information, well, those are the people from the quote-unquote poorer family who had to work to earn it. So we have a higher regard for the information we receive and the process of uncovering information. But as the years progress, you're just going to have more and more people who were born in the age where it's readily available. So it stands to reason that people will get dumber and dumber. Appreciate the intellectual process less and less because it's readily available, because they don't have to put forth any kind of effort. Now, that's not to say that this is a fait accompli. This is something that obviously can be staved, but it requires an effort, and an effort that I have not seen being made. So, the supreme irony, another supreme irony of 2020 to me, is the fact that we live in the information age and people are dumber than they've ever been. Because again, how many people believe that this man in the previous article that I read you about I read you the headline of the man who was part of the plot. He was a leader of the plot to kidnap Governor Whitmer. How many people know that this man was a Black Lives Matter activist? More aligned with Black Lives Matter than with the alt-right. How many people know he wasn't alt-right? How many people know that he was anti-Trump? I would wager that within your circle, not very many. Because again, there's no premium put on information and the intellectual process. People nowadays, they just read a headline and they go with whatever the headline says. Please don't be deceived enough to not understand that that point is lost on the media. They understand that all you read is the headline. They understand that most people, okay, let's see, I'll just scroll down here. I got 3 headlines here. Okay, I know what's going on. They understand that that's how most people think now. In fact, a lot of these articles from these fallen media institutions, such as the New York Times, a lot of times if you read beyond the title, the rest of the article flies in the face of the title. And back in the day, that was called yellow journalism. When you just released a radical title, a poignant title, just to attract people, and then the rest of your article didn't jive with it. Nowadays, that's just called Tuesday morning editorial. So, anyway, just something for you guys to think of, man. And, maybe challenge some people on this. Because the only way it gets better is if we put the work in. Like I said, I would love for these people to be interviewed because it gives us a greater perspective on what their mentality is. Otherwise, we don't know. And people are like, well, why do you need to know? And to me, that is the most inane question of all. Why do we need to know? Really? Okay, well, allow me to answer that with yet another analogy. Let's say there's a fire that starts in your neighborhood that consumes an entire building. You, as a neighbor, you're going to walk up to the fire chief and you're going to say what? Hey, what caused this fire? What caused this building to burn down? What if he said to you, you don't need to know. It's just a fire. Would that satisfy you? Absolutely not, because you would want to know if it's something that they did that you're doing that you don't even understand that you're doing that could cause the same thing to happen, right? You would want more information so you could prevent it from happening again. Wait for it. Same thing here. Why aren't we interviewing these people? Why aren't we getting their story? Because as far as I'm concerned, that's more information about what caused them to do what they did, so we can correct that action to prevent it from happening again. Hey man, thank you for tuning in for this episode of Planet Hog, and I'm gonna have another sip of this Kentucky All, and my lady's gonna make me some eggs and grits, and then I'm gonna call it a day. So until the next time, peace.